I have a problem. I'm an overly excited millennial with a 5-year-old mind who gets easily drawn to all shiny objects, which leads me to want to try, learn, and explore every single interesting thing I can possibly get my hands on. Now that sounds like it can be a pretty good thing, except for the fact that I only have 2 hands, 24 hours, and if I'm lucky, 50 years left of functioning life. So things can get a little out of hand sometimes. And that has inspired me this month to plan and track every single minute of my life. This sounds pretty neurotic, but this comes from my frustration and building anxiety from juggling way too many things at one time. In this interconnected, fast-paced, on-demand world where there's bottomless pit of distraction fighting for our attention, it's just so easy for me to get pulled to all different things that are sidetracking me from working on my projects. Don't get me wrong, I'm a recovering workaholic, so I believe in the balance of doing things for the sake of the fun of it, or really spending time to nurture your well-being. But I should feel like I deserve the time and I'm actually spending it intentionally instead of doing it because I'm running away from the discomfort of important work or mindlessly reacting to urges. But first, before I start tracking my time, I am going to create a time budget. I listed down all my life fundamentals, things that I do that are pretty much fixed and essential, from sleeping, working, socializing, and even being realistic to include procrastinating. A few things that might not be regular for some people, but I have integrated in my daily routine includes learning, meditating, and thinking. Yes, I have a dedicated category to think. So for me, this includes 15 to 20 minutes of journaling early in the morning, 5 to 10 minutes of planning my day, followed by 2 hours weekly and monthly reflection on the weekend. Now for each category I've listed, I allocated the average daily hours I intended to spend on weekdays and weekends, and once I'm done, I get this beautiful pie chart that gives me a bird's eye view of my time breakdown. What's immediately noticeable is 50% is immediately gone to sleeping and my day job, and another 20% to socializing and logistics like laundry and getting ready. I have 2 paradoxical realizations by this point. One, time is limited. How much time is already gone to what's necessary for being a human? But 2, actually, if I follow this plan wisely, I'm still left with a pretty good chunk of time to work on meaningful projects. And that brings me to the second part of the process. Now that I know how much left I can allocate to my projects, I can then distribute and prioritize my time wisely. Whew, so that's quite a long process, but now the fun part begins. To track my time, I'm using the app called A Time Logger. It's simple and has all the necessary functions that meet my needs. I created all the categories in my life that I want to track, I added the widget on my home screen, and off I go. Every time I'm starting an activity, I'll tap on a category to start the timer, and when I need to switch tasks, I simply stop the previous timer and tap on another category. So the whole thing is pretty difficult. Honestly, the whole thing can be quite manual and requires some amount of self-discipline to follow through. Having to always grab your phone and update the app before you start doing anything can really get on your nerves sometimes. But despite the annoyance, the act of setting my intention ahead of time is really useful to prime me to be more conscious of what I want to be doing rather than switching between tasks. In fact, David Mayer, a cognitive scientist, says that when we are switching between tasks, we're increasing the time it takes to finish our primary task by 25%. To put that in perspective, if you work 9 to 5, 5 days a week, you're wasting in total 10 hours just by switching between tasks. But I'm not perfect. Sometimes I'll cheat. When my time is being tracked under work, for example, I could be surfing Facebook or Instagram and then I forgot to update the app. But more often than not, the guilt will kick in and I'll bounce back quickly to what I'm supposed to be doing. And as each days went by, I became more and more disciplined in tracking my time. At one point, it just became so ingrained in my habit, I became so anal to start the timer before I do anything.
Hey, Edric, could you?
But
what are you?
Hey, what's up? But despite all the progress I made, 2 weeks into the challenge, I realized I left out a very critical part of the process: to actually analyze and make sense of the data. When I came to my senses to sit down and analyze the data, I found one big awful surprise: that I went off track for both weeks by about 40 hours. What it means is the accumulated variance in time between what I plan with what I actually overspend or underspend was 40 hours each week. By this point, I learned the hard way that the act of tracking alone doesn't result to any meaningful changes unless you actually make sense of what you actually tracked. Immediately looking at this, I understand the value of tracking my time to give me that reality fact check, as opposed to relying on my mind that is subject to a lot of human biases, such as picking on the memories, while in absolute view, it actually doesn't amount to that many hours. I always complain about I don't feel that my English eloquence is improving, and this is telling me that, hey, it's not improving because you've not spent enough time on it. Also, I have not been spending enough time on my fitness. It's because I have not been going to the gym in the office because of COVID. I also did pretty well, not procrastinating that much. I only overspent by 7%, but in the second week, I overspent by 87%. I also found, not that this is a surprise, that I'm an overly social person. I overspent my social budget by 65% in the first week and 41% in the second week. In the first week, I spent 28 hours socializing versus the 17 hours that I planned, so I gotta really do something about this because I can see how this has an immediate effect on my project hours, how I'm underspending on a lot of my project time budget. So this is a really unpleasant fact that I need to face, but I guess I'm taking the first step to get better in making time for all these things that matter by just first facing the reality, understanding what the real situation is, so I can figure out what's my strategy to bounce back and hit my goals. So looking at how bad I did in the past 2 weeks, I decided to step up my game and decrease the amount of variance hours. My first attack plan is to increase my awareness and to keep constant progress on the goals. And lo and behold, I found that the app actually has the feature for you to create time goals for the categories you want to stay on top of. So I create a rich category and also limit categories for procrastination and social time, because someone gotta continue social biz, yo. Second, I also adjusted the time budget to adapt to a more realistic time allocation based on my 2 weeks data. Lastly, I started to book appointments with myself in my calendar to make sure that all the projects are getting the time they deserve based on my time goals. Because I overspent so much time with socializing, I created a separate calendar to create these social blocks ahead of time based on the social hours that I've dedicated for myself to remind me that, okay, these are all the slots that you have to socialize and you shouldn't go out and party beyond this. Okay, limiting social time is still a big challenge for me as an extroverted person, but already as the week progresses, I'm seeing more and more improvement from the reflection and the plan that I made. I signed up for a gym trial and started working out more to find out that it's closed the next few days because of Corona. But that's okay, and I continue to work out more at home, and I find making a habit to check daily where I'm pacing against my goals on the app was also a big driver for me to make conscious effort to spend more time in my projects. And I'll go to the extent of bringing my laptop to social events just so that I could clock on more project hours in the cab on the way there. When I knew that I've exceeded my procrastination hours, when I tried to procrastinate a little bit more by watching Netflix, I immediately snapped myself out of it because I knew that I no longer deserved to procrastinate because I've exceeded the time budget. With the social calendar, when I found that I've used some of my social blocks, or when I checked the app to see that I'm close to hitting my social limit, I made a lot of hard decisions to say no to a lot of social invitations. Alright, so 5 weeks have passed and I've been tracking my time with discipline, and this is the result. The first thing I look at is my variance hours, which is the difference between my time plan and the time that I actually spent. And I'm happy to see after the big shocking revelation, my variance hours decreased. I was averaging at 39 hours in the first 2 weeks, and in the last 3 weeks, I was averaging at 32 hours. If I look at the breakdown of my categories, you can see that I actually need more sleep than I thought. My working hours have also gradually declined, so either I've not been as productive working from home, or if you're being really real and include the time you spend on socializing, on procrastinating, or the time you spend on learning other things, you don't actually spend that much time really focused and doing deep work in your day job. Sorry, boss. My social variance hours have significantly improved. They're getting closer to the baseline, which means the social blocks and being aware of my social time has been working. My procrastination hours drastically decreased from 8 hours in the second week to 3 to 2 hours per week. And it did increase again to 7 hours in the 5th week because Money Heist aka Casa de Papel was released in that week. So I'm happy to see that even though there are some projects that were still left behind, some projects such as my startup and my YouTube challenge, and I'm dedicating more hours to them. And in fact, because of this, the time I spent on studying my neuroscience course has doubled, and that was what led me to finally finish the first part of my in your science course. Woohoo! So now that the experiment has concluded, the question is, will I continue with this habit? Yes and no. Seeing where I have been underspending and overspending in specific categories in my life was definitely invaluable. I really like the awareness that I've developed. I also really like the idea of setting intention ahead of time so they can't really focus on what I'm dedicating the session for. But I also at the same time don't want to be too rigid. I don't want to be a machine to always have to track everything. I want to welcome a little spontaneity. Also, I felt like sometimes I spend way too much time stressing where do I have to categorize this time under. When I was posting something on social media, for example, I would think, is it actually giving because I'm posting something of value? Is it actually socializing because I'm using social media? Or am I actually procrastinating? So I spent like a good 5 to 10 minutes stressing like, what is this time should be tracked under? I also realized I don't need to track things that are already ingrained in my habit or things I don't really plan on changing. Things like sleeping or like meditating, learning, and working out, I will naturally make progress on them. But things that really need my willpower to make progress on and are not ingrained in my habit, or things that I might be spending way too much time into, these are the things I see huge values in tracking and budgeting time for those things. So yes, I'll definitely recommend you to track your time. You definitely don't have to go as extreme as I did to track every minute of your life, but just pick 1 to 3 categories in your life that you think are important and you think that you need to devote more time to. Tracking your time will give you that absolute objective evaluation on whether or not you actually have spent enough time on what matters. And at the end of the day, like the famous quote says, you can't change what you can't measure.